G'day guys and welcome back to the Boundary Riders Podcast. Now we're up to episode 18 and we just completed round 16, probably into the last third now of the AFL season, and the ladder is starting to shape up now. We've got a lot of teams pushing up now, including the Giants, who won a massive game against Melbourne today, because I'm recording this on Sunday. We saw Port Adelaide just clutch home a win against Essendon. Collingwood smashed the Gold Coast Suns to keep their spot on top of the ladder. The Crows smashed North Melbourne to really solidify their spot in the 8 as well. And we saw Sydney and Geelong play out a draw, which I'm going to talk about first, and then we'll get into the rest of the week's games. So, like I said, the Swans versus Geelong game was the second game of the round on Friday night, and I'm sure you guys can see in the background, Swan supporter. That was one of the most embarrassing performances I've seen from Sydney in a very long time. Probably just outside of the grand final last year, that's probably the worst performance I've seen from them in 3 or 4 years. The fact that so many players missed from so close, the fact that we couldn't lock away Geelong when we had the game for 3 quarters. In the third quarter they played pretty well, Geelong, but we dominated three quarters of that game and we just couldn't put it away. It was very embarrassing from Sydney, and it was a really tough game to watch. We had so many opportunities to win that game. Isaac Heaney missed 2 shots on the full, and Robbie Fox ran into an open goal from 10 metres out and hit the post. Tom Hickey missed 2 goals from pretty easy range. Our best kick for a goal was Braden Campbell, and no offence to the guy, but he shouldn't be our best kick at goal when he's playing at half-back. He's been brilliant this year for the Swans. I think he's been Sydney's best, most improved player. I just can't believe that Sydney drew that game. And Geelong, I think 100% are breathing a sigh of relief after that, because they still have a chance to make finals, Geelong. Both teams will probably be very disappointed that they didn't get the win, only because that now their percentage means nothing. And the teams around them, like Sydney now, are probably the only team that could make the 8. And I'm calling this now, Sydney will not make the 8. That they can't beat a team higher than them. I don't even think they have this year. They've beaten Carlton this year, Richmond this year, Hawthorn, North Melbourne, and West Coast, which are 5 of their 6 wins. And their other one was against the Gold Coast Suns, who are just in front of them. So Sydney have a couple more games this season against teams above them. They will not make finals, and I don't think they deserve to make finals on the way that they played against Geelong. Now, obviously, they beat West Coast by 171 points, and West Coast just lost against St Kilda tonight, so, good on them for trying at least, but, I don't think it makes much of a difference. They still lost again, and their percentage is below 50%, so that's just embarrassing for West Coast, but, they got a decent game against St Kilda, and St Kilda probably didn't take them too seriously, and, as they've played the last fortnight, West Coast, of, actual games, can you take them too seriously? I don't think you can, to be fair, but, Sydney have beaten all the teams below them at the moment and beat the Gold Coast Suns in round 1 when the Gold Coast didn't really show up in that game. So Sydney, I don't think, are going to make finals, and it was incredibly embarrassing. And I don't think the game as a whole was a very good game to watch either. These 2 teams played in the grand final last year, and neither of them could kick straight at the big moments. And if I'm supporters of both teams, Geelong will be a little bit more happier because I think they'll still make the finals with the games that they have down in Geelong. But as a Sydney fan, I don't know how you could watch that and be any sort of impressed at all, really. It's good to see a couple of young kids playing well, like Angus Sheldrick. I think he's going to be a great player. Errol Goulden is playing brilliant footy. And Braden Campbell as well, along with maybe McDonald. But a lot of the senior players didn't play that well. I think Isaac Heaney needs to seriously work on his kicking because it's been poor very much this season. I don't think the Buddy Franklin. I think now it's time that Sydney need to just say to him, look, we're going to have to let you go. Do you want to play the rest of the season out, or do you want to just have a farewell game and then maybe look elsewhere? But other than that, I don't think Sydney should be keeping these older players on the list. They need to be working on getting some players into the team. That's what I think Sydney messed up in the off-season as well. They needed, if your team's not moving forward, they're moving backwards, and not recruiting any players from the trade period or from the trade period or free agency, I think was a wrong decision. I think they should have moved Buddy Franklin on last year and worked on fixing up the list in parts that they needed to, because they only picked up Aaron Francis, and I think he's been serviceable in the back 50, but we recruited him basically as a forward, and he hasn't been able to play forward this year, and I don't think he's a forward to begin with, but Sydney did not work on picking up players. Geelong, on the other hand, who did win the premiership, picked up a lot of young kids, and maybe they've gone backwards a bit this year, but I think in the longevity of the team, they're definitely going to be working well. And I do think Sydney are working well for the longevity. They've got a lot of young kids, and a lot of them, I think, are going to be stars of the game. But when you're not recruiting players from other clubs, I don't think you're moving in the right direction. I think Sydney should have been looking a lot more for defence last year. For example, I think Radicalea could have been a player Sydney could have looked at as a defender that they could have used. I think that Sydney should have been looking maybe as another midfielder that they could use, maybe a runner, for example, and maybe even a small forward or a small defender or something like that. But I don't think, and I especially think they should have picked up a ruckman. I think they need to seriously be looking for that this year. But yeah, that's just me, and I think Sydney have been very poor this year. I don't think that's really a statement that's no one is really not said. I think they've got, obviously, it's flattering the percentage, obviously, because they had a massive win against Hawthorn earlier on in the year, and obviously the massive win against West Coast a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, I'm very disappointed this year in Sydney. I don't think it will be that big a deal going in the years to come, because I think this is a year that Sydney probably, I think they got a little bit, not so much lucky, but they hit their form right at the right time last year, and then, just went probably further than anyone would have expected. So it's not a poor thing for Sydney to finish out of the 8, in my opinion. I think that they can bounce back next year, have an easier draw, get some players back. I know they've had a lot of injuries, but I don't like to make that excuse, because I think that teams nowadays should be well enough to have a reserves that they can cover. And I think most teams have shown that this year, like Collingwood, like a couple of other teams we've seen this year. Like, I think Richmond have done pretty well with injuries and that, like, been able to cover them. Melbourne have had it at times, St Kilda, of course, as well. So I don't think injury should be the be-all and end-all. But let's talk about something a little bit more cheerful, and that was the round that was been. Now, we had some massive games last week, and I guess we'll be doing the review of round 16 based on the votes that we do every week. And as I've been saying as well, at the end of the season, we'll be doing like a live countdown of like the votes that we do. So we do the 3, 2, 1 votes every single game of the season. We'll be doing it so far. I've revealed them every now and then just to keep everyone updated, but they're all on the Instagram. If you guys want to go through and count them all, it's all up to you. But that's basically what our countdown's going to be for this year. And maybe with about a month to go, I won't be revealing votes and stuff. So then it was just like fully, so then no one knows other than me and maybe my brother, who by the way is away again this week. He's got work again, so that's a little bit, that sucks a bit, but he did give the votes for the Sunday games today, so I appreciate that from him. But let's get into the Thursday night game. Brisbane just absolutely smashed Richmond. I guess maybe they're a little bit sluggish off the bye, Richmond, but I don't think there's really an excuse for this performance. They were actually pushing towards the 8 going, and I actually think they had a real chance against Brisbane in this game. But not many of them showed up, and now they sit 15th on the ladder, and they're going to be in a very tough spot to even make a push towards finals. To be fair, though, they're only 6 points out of the 8, and with 8 games to go, they still could make it, but I think it's a little bit too far back for them now. But nonetheless, the 3, 2, 1's votes, we gave 3 votes to Lachie Neale, 2 votes to Joe Danaher, and the 1 vote to Hugh McCluggage. Look, Lachie Neale was brilliant, especially in the second half. He definitely lifted for his team when they wanted to, put a little bit of a dagger through the Tigers, and I think he did brilliantly. Joe Danaher was brilliant up forward. I think he needs to find that consistent form to push Brisbane towards a potential grand final or premiership, because when he plays his poor footy, he is very hard to watch, and I think he'd be one of the most frustrating players in the competition. But when he's playing well, he's one of the best. And Hugh McCluggage has been very quiet this season, probably been one of the very... I don't know. He's probably an All-Australian wingman last year if they actually picked a wingman in the All-Australian team. But he actually has played pretty poorly this year. But he was definitely very good in the first half against Richmond. And if the votes were called at halftime, McCluggage would have got the 3. But Lachie Neale definitely lifted in the second half to get Brisbane to a very comfortable win. After that, we get to the Sydney-Geelong game. As we said, this was a scrappy game. This was a shocker to watch, really. I was talked about it a minute ago. If you guys want to listen to it again, feel free to do so. But I do have the 3, 2, 1 votes here. 3 votes gave to Errol Goulden, 2 votes to Tom Atkins, and 1 vote to Braden Campbell. 3 votes to Errol Goulden. I think that was pretty self-explanatory. He was probably the best on the ground all night. He did have some stages where he should have kicked goals as well. So maybe... I just think that Sydney as a whole need to work on their kicking. I think they were like second for accuracy this season, which shocked me because I know they've lost a lot of games this season based on their goal kicking. I think maybe it flattered them a little bit against West Coast where they kicked very, very straight. But again, there was no pressure on them. So when pressure comes to Sydney, they don't know. Their kicking goes out the window, really. But the 2 votes I gave to Tom Atkins, and I'm really impressed about how he's playing this season for Geelong. Probably a lot more in the past month or so, considering Dangerfield was out for quite a bit of this season. But he's just been their bull in there. And I don't think anyone would have really seen Tom Atkins to become a midfielder, but he's honestly a really good defensive midfielder. He played brilliantly last week, Tom Atkins. And he kept them in the game in a lot of stages in this one for Geelong. So I think that Geelong will be very happy with his performances over the past fortnight or so. And the 1 vote I did give to Braden Campbell, when other players in this game weren't being clean, he was the cleanest. I think the Sydney are very lucky that he kicked goals as well, because Sydney would have lost this game if he didn't kick straight on a couple of occasions. And I think Sydney have definitely found another one here through the academy again. So Sydney will be happy with his performance, and probably Errol Gouldens as well, but they definitely got a lot of work on Sydney going into next season. After that, we get to the Bulldogs versus Fremantle. The Bulldogs won again. They pulled away late, which was really good to see from the Bulldogs, because Fremantle looked like they may have had them on the ropes early in the fourth term. But then the Bulldogs just kicked away, and they actually keep their top 4 hopes alive now with the loss from Melbourne. So Fremantle are in a very big hole now. I don't know if they're going to make finals now. They're definitely in that log jam. They've had a couple of games in the past few weeks where they've had to win, and they've dropped that one, and they dropped the Giants game a couple of weeks ago. So I think that they're in a big trouble, Fremantle. I think they'll be okay like Sydney, because they have a very good young list, but I think this season may almost be over for them. But we get to the 3-2-1 votes. 3 votes go to Ugle-Hagan, 2 votes to Marcus Bontempelli, and Treloar got the 1 vote. Now, Jamara Ugle-Hagan has probably been their standout forward this year for the Bulldogs, and he probably shouldn't be. I think Aaron Norton has played very poorly at times this season, and somehow Jamara has just played some brilliant footy where I don't know where he's pulled this form from, but he's definitely going to be a star. I think it was obviously compared to Buddy Franklin very early on in his juniors, so I don't know if he will ever get to those feet, but he's definitely playing some good footy for the Bulldogs at the moment, and yeah, I think that he's definitely going to be a future star of the game. 2 votes go to Marcus Bontempelli. He's been brilliant, this season. Probably a Brownlow favourite at this stage. And he got the 2 votes. 1 vote we gave to Adam Treloar. He just tackled all day in this game. And you always love a tackler. I think that he's going to probably take the spot, though, of Caleb Daniel. So, a little bit disappointing on my friend, because I have my fantasy team. But Adam Treloar is a quality player, and I think they'd just be very happy to have him back and playing some consistent games, because he's been very injury-prone, especially this season. After that, we get to the Crows versus North Melbourne. Not much to talk about here. Crows just smashed North, and I know a lot of people are talking about the Crows being a finals threat. I honestly don't know if they will be. Unless they make 5th or 6th or somehow scrape into that top 4, I don't really see the Crows doing much, just because they're winning their games at home, and they're smashing teams at home. They smashed St Kilda earlier on in the year. I don't really think that the Crows are going to do much in finals, but I really don't know. They could if they get some games at home. I think that I think they're actually probably better at home than Port Adelaide at home, to be fair. But I think Port Adelaide are obviously the better team, because they can win away from home. So the Crows flogged North Melbourne. Wasn't really a huge deal, in my opinion. But nonetheless, the 3-2-1 votes, 3 votes went to Riley O'Brien, 2 votes went to Isaac Rankin, and the 1 vote went to Ben Keys. Now, Riley O'Brien, he's been probably a bit up and down this season, but this game he definitely stood up, played brilliantly, kicked 2 goals, which I don't think he's kicked multiple goals in his career before that game. So it's good to see him getting forward and kicking some goals. He's usually a lot more of the ruckman who gets back and helps out the defence, taking the last line of defence marks and stuff like that. But Isaac Rankin kicked 5 goals. I think it's a career high for him, I would assume. He kicked straight, though, which is definitely a compliment for him, because he's had some times this year where he's missed a lot of easy shots and not kicked straight, but he kicked 5 straight in this one, so if he can get some form, he can definitely push the Crows a lot higher. And Ben Keys is just in a rich vein of form at the moment for the Crows. He kicked 2 goals as well, playing in the midfield, and I think it's a little bit disappointing, because he probably took votes away from Jordan Dawson, was in front, I believe, in the votes for us, so I'm not too sure how he's doing in the Brownlow, but the more important votes, obviously, are for the Riders medal, so I'm sure Jordan Dawson's just devastated by not getting a vote in that one. But nonetheless, we get to the next game, Gold Coast versus Collingwood, and the Gold Coast should be incredibly disappointed with this game. they had a real chance in front of a big crowd for their home game. Now, I know looking at the crowd, it was mostly Collingwood, but finally they got a home game which was sold out. And I think the last time it happened was in 2014. So to finally get a game that was sold out at their home ground, and then they give this performance was really disappointing. They lost by 78 points. They didn't kick a goal till I think late in the second term, I believe. And this is really disappointing. They've nearly a full-strength team in the Gold Coast Suns at the moment. And I'm not saying they had to beat Collingwood, but they had to be competitive. And this was just really disappointing. But then we get to the 3-2-1 votes. 3 votes go to Nick Dacos, 2 votes to Jamie Elliott, and the 1 vote to John Noble. Nick Dacos is just smashing the competition at the moment. He got the 3 votes in this one, had 40-plus touches, kicked a goal, was brilliant around the midfield. People can say that he had, he gets his cheat touches, but I think he just uses it very, very well. So at least when he does use it, he's very creative with it. And he's almost a Brownlow favourite at the moment at the age of 19. I don't think I've seen a kid at 19, take over the AFL competition the way that he has, and he's playing some brilliant footy at the moment. Jamie Elliott got 5 goals in this game, and he was just brilliant up forward. He had Charlie Ballard in the first half, but he did too well. I think that I don't know if Charlie Ballard should be playing on a small forward, in my opinion. I think he's too good in the air, and you put the ball on the ground, I think Elliott's going to win all day. So he had a good day out, and he probably needed it, considering he probably hasn't had a big year so far, Jamie Elliott, and we know how quality he can be. So if he can hit some rich vein of form late in the season, he could definitely have a real push for the grand final or a premiership for Collingwood. And the 1 vote I gave to John Noble, he's definitely getting some real good form in recent weeks. John Noble obviously picked up as a mid-season draftee. And he's playing some really good footy at the moment, John Noble. So I think Collingwood would be really happy to see that. And I think Collingwood, is still the favourites for the premiership. But speaking of another premiership contender, we have Port Adelaide versus Essendon next. And I was talking to my brother after this game, because obviously he's a Port supporter. And we both said the same thing. Thank God for Port Adelaide that Dan Houston took that mark on 50. Because if it was any other player on the team, I don't actually think anyone would have made that distance. Maybe Kane Farrell, but other than that, I don't think anyone was kicking that ball with a wet ball from 50 plus metres out. It was a brilliant kick from Dan Houston, just made the distance, and they are definitely up there, Port. I think they should be talked about a little bit more at the moment. I think it's just everyone's just saying Collingwood's going to win the premiership really at this stage, or they're definitely the grand premiership favourites. And I tend to agree with that, but Port Adelaide definitely can't be shied away from. They're playing some massive footy at the moment, and it's very disappointing for Essendon because they had this game with about a minute to go. They just couldn't lock it in, and they just couldn't lock it down their end. So you can't really have too much to say against Essendon. I think it's a little bit dangerous for them now, though. They are really teetering on 8th spot right now. Don't have the best percentage, and they've got teams like Geelong, GWS behind them. And, they're both biting at the bit at the moment because, Geelong are going to be very hard to beat down in Geelong. And GWS are in some rich vein of form. So Essendon, like I said when we did our rest of season predictions for the rest of the season, I actually said that Essendon are going to fall out of the 8. And it's only because they've got a real tough 6 weeks. And the 2 first games that they've had when we made that video, they've lost. So Essendon, I think, should be making finals from here, but they have to win one of these games in the next 4 weeks, or they may well miss out. But nonetheless, we get to the 3-2-1 votes. 3 votes gave to Connor Rozee, 2 votes to Dan Houston, and the 1 vote to Jai Caldwell. Connor Rozee was probably the difference in this game at the end. I know Dan Houston kicked the winning goal, but he was definitely a lot cleaner in a wet game of footy. So you got to give credit to Connor Rozee there. Dan Houston, I'm not giving him 2 votes just because of that goal on the siren. I mean, it was massive, but he was brilliant all night. Had 30 plus touches off half back, and for a guy that they picked up as a late draft pick, I believe, he's been a massive godsend for the power. And last one I gave to Jai Caldwell, the last vote, 1 vote. He's actually been very good, especially since Darcy Parish went down. And suddenly he's probably got that midfield spot, probably taken over from Ben Hobbs, I believe. And he's actually playing some really good footy, Jai Caldwell. So obviously came from the Giants, didn't really get a go there. Got picked up by Essendon, took an injury last year, earlier in the season. But this season he's hit strength to strength. And he's definitely going to be an asset for Essendon in their push to September. After that, we get a Sunday afternoon early game. The Blues smashed Hawthorn. I don't even know if they got a goal in the first half. Hawthorn, they were disappointing again. Looks like they really can't hold up without James Sicily, which is very disappointing. I think he's gone for next week as well, so I really can't see them winning without him. They conceded another 100-point loss another 100 points against their opposition. Carlton did very well. My brother did the votes in this one. He gave the 3 votes to Adam Chera, 2 votes to Sam Doherty, and the 1 vote to Harry Mackay. I don't think Carlton are back by any means. They've beaten 2 very poor teams in the last 2 weeks. They beat the Gold Coast when the Gold Coast were playing poorly, and they beat Hawthorn, who can't win a game without their captain, James Sicily. So I don't think this means much for Carlton. They get a little bit of the percentage back, and I don't think that makes a difference, though. I think they've got Fremantle next week, so I think that's at home, I believe. So if they can win that one as well, I don't think it makes a difference, though. I think this is a failure of a season, unless somehow Carlton can scrape into the 8, which, they technically could. They're only 6 points behind, but I just don't think they've done much here, Carlton. I think it's a very disappointing season, and unless they do somehow scrape into the 8 spot, it's just been a failure, in my opinion. But nonetheless, next we get to a massive upset. Melbourne versus GWS up in Darwin. I think Melbourne is about time to stop having games up there. They're not that good up there, and they've lost another game, which could potentially lose them a top 4 spot very soon. GWS were massive in this game, though. Halfback Harry Himmelberg was brilliant as well. Tom Green was massive. Toby Green was good as well. And they're just... Adam Kingsley, he's taken a couple of maybe he may have made his run a little bit too late towards the finals this season, but he's definitely the coach for the Giants. He's getting them to play some really good football, and the Giants are going to be very good in the next year or so. But Melbourne, on the other hand, had 20 scoring shots, and we saw Sydney on Friday night. They cost themselves a win, and this cost Melbourne a win as well. They kicked 15 behinds, and bad kicking's bad football. We've said that about Carlton all year, and Melbourne just dropped 4 points there. It's very disappointing, and I think they definitely need Clayton Oliver back really quickly, because they've lost their last 2 games now, Melbourne. They lost to Port Adelaide about a month or so ago, and they're teetering on that 4th spot right now. And they've got, St Kilda, the Bulldogs, and the Crows, really, who are pushing for that 4th spot, and even the Cats to an extent. If the Cats can get on a bit of a run, they could very well take that 4th spot from them. So Melbourne are a bit of a hole right now, but nonetheless, the 3-2-1 votes, we get my brother again did the votes here. Jack Viney got the 3 votes, Tom Green got the 2 votes, and Christian Petrarca got the 1 vote. So Jack Viney, I think, for Melbourne, has definitely stood up in the past couple of weeks as well. Was massive on King's birthday against Collingwood and got them over the line, in my opinion. But yeah, I think he's playing some really good footy at the moment, but I think a lot of Melbourne players are definitely underperforming at the moment. And finally, we get to a really almost an upset of probably this century, really. Even though West Coast, were at home, they nearly got over St Kilda, and St Kilda survived an absolute massive scare. They could have really been in trouble here, the Saints. But they got over the line against West Coast by 8 points. There was only 1 goal kicked in the last quarter, but it went the Saints' way, and they just got over the line against West Coast. My brother's done the votes again. 3 votes to Brad Crouch. He had 16 or 17 tackles. He was massive in this game. 2 votes to Rowan Marshall, and the 1 vote to Owens. And he got 4 goals in this one. And this kid, I think, should be definitely up there with the Rising Star nominations. I think he's probably not being talked about enough, really, and I think he's been brilliant this year, especially playing his second ruck, when that can be a very difficult role to play. He's been brilliant. West Coast, look, what can you say? They were very close in this one. I don't think it makes much of a difference. This really just shows that St Kilda didn't show up, and they were lucky to get the win in the end, and they hold their 5th spot right now, and they're only a percentage behind Melbourne from the top 4, so some teams up the top can always have a bad day, but if they can just survive through and get the win, it can make a massive difference, and I guess that's what St Kilda did, so I don't really know how much St Kilda can do through the finals, but they definitely pulled off a win here. Only 2 wins from their last 5 games, so they're in a bit of trouble here. I don't know, really, because I've said there's a lot of teams pushing for that top 8 spot outside of the 8 at the moment. Really, I could list any team from 15 up could make it. I really don't think Carlton, Richmond, or Sydney could, and I'd probably cross out Gold Coast. But there's 3 teams there, Freo, GWS, Geelong, really pushing for those top 8 spots. And if those teams from 5th to 8th, if they're not careful, they could definitely miss out on finals this season. Alright guys, so now we'll move on and we'll talk about round 17. It's a massive round for a lot of teams. A lot of big games that could decide the 8 throughout the season now. And we start off with Thursday night, Richmond versus Sydney. And this is a massive game. I think that Sydney, I think both teams, because as well they've both got that draw, I think this really decides if one of these teams can push for the 8. Whoever loses this game, I think is gone. They'll probably be they'll probably be 10 points outside the 8. And I think that's going to be too much at this point. Because it is at the MCG, I have tipped Richmond. I just think that game against Brisbane last week, probably a little bit of a mulligan, if you could say that, because of the coming off the bye. We've seen a lot of teams this season come off the bye very poorly. I think the Richmond probably have been in some really good form as of late, so I think they were kind of due for a loss. And I think back at the MCG against the Swans, I think they got a big chance against them, and I'm going to be picking Richmond in this one. Friday night, another massive game, Bulldogs versus Collingwood at Marvel, which I do think gives the Bulldogs a bit of an advantage. But on the other hand, I think Collingwood's game that they play, I think the Marvel Stadium surface and the quick footy won't exactly hamper Collingwood too much. So in this one, I'm probably going to pick Collingwood as well, just because they're in such good form. I know they lost the game against Melbourne, 3 weeks ago, but I think that Collingwood have definitely got that form back, and I think against the Bulldogs, who have been very up and down this season, have been able to smash the teams below them, but the teams above them they've struggled with. So I'm going to be picking the Pies in this one. After that, we have Brisbane versus West Coast to the Gabba. West Coast may have given St Kilda a bit of a fright, but this game's going to be a smashing. Brisbane win this one, and comfortably. I would be very surprised if this isn't a 100-point winning again for Brisbane. I think the West Coast could be suffering a third 100-point loss in 4 games. So, sorry to West Coast fans out there, but I don't think you'd be that surprised by that one. I think Brisbane are going to win this one and absolutely smash the Eagles. Then we get to Saturday afternoon, GWS versus Hawthorn. I don't believe that James Sicily is back for this one. I think he's got another week left on his suspension. So, with saying that, I think the Giants will win this one. And if they do, they're right upping with a chance to make to get inside the 8. I think they're 4 points behind 8th spot right now, which is Essendon. In fact, they are. They're off by 9%, so they wouldn't actually be in the 8 by the end of the round. But because the Crows and the Bombers both play against each other, one of those teams will be right on that cusp of, that 8th spot. They'll both probably still be in there by the end of the round unless Geelong win, which we'll get to that in a minute, which they will win, by the way. But, I think the Giants have a really big chance here to maybe even get some percentage on Hawthorn as well, because Hawthorn have been pretty well beatable in the past couple of weeks, especially without their captain. So I'm going to be picking the Giants. I think they'll win this one pretty comfortably as well. After that, we get to Saturday night, St Kilda versus Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. It's a really tough game now because Melbourne have lost another game. They've been in some pretty poor form as well. Lost their past 2 and lost 3 of their past 5. But that's the same as St Kilda. Both these teams have been very iffy form as of late. The reason why I'm going to be picking Melbourne in this one is probably just because I trust them a bit more, to be honest. There's not much method to this tip, to be fair. I think St Kilda could give them a bit of a shake, to be fair. Melbourne, if they can get their running game going at Marvel, I think they could actually run past Melbourne. I think they could be a quicker side, but I just don't trust the Saints, to be fair with yous. And I think that Melbourne could win this. I think Melbourne will win this one. The other Saturday night game is Port Adelaide versus the Gold Coast Suns at Adelaide Oval. The Gold Coast, I don't know. They just don't seem... I don't think they can do it this season. They've just lost some really important games over the past 3 weeks. They lost against Carlton 3 weeks ago, and now they've lost against Collingwood when they really should have had to go and win that game. Well, not even have to win, but they had to really perform well to give some sort of confidence. And going to Adelaide Oval against a red-hot Port Adelaide, who are now 12 wins in a row, I don't think they can do it. I think Port Adelaide will go 13 in a row, and I think that they're going to give a real shake to Collingwood towards the end of the year. As they only play, in I think 3 weeks' time, I think it's around, I can't even remember what round it is. I think it's around 19 or 20 when they play Collingwood. I think that game's going to be a massive game of footy at Adelaide Oval. After that, though, Sunday afternoon, Geelong versus North Melbourne down at GMHBA Stadium. Like I said, Geelong are going to be very hard to beat down there this season, and North Melbourne, I think kind of the hype of the Brett Ratton stuff has kind of fallen off now. We saw them lose pretty convincingly against the Crows, and I think Geelong will go and roll over North Melbourne pretty easily, and Geelong basically make the 8 after this game no matter what, and they could definitely make a push towards the finals after that. Then we get to Sunday afternoon, probably the game of the round in my opinion, up there with the Bulldogs versus Collingwood, is Essendon versus the Crows. This is a massive game. Both teams teetering on that 7th spot, have teams fighting around them, to try and get into the top 8, and both of them sit on the same amount of wins at the moment with 8 wins, 7 losses. Percentage, Crows obviously have the better of that with a lot of wins by big margins at home. This one isn't Marvel though, and the only reason why I'm tipping Essendon in this one is purely because of that. The Crows have not been the best outside of home this season. Essendon have been in some pretty good form. I know they have lost their previous 2 games, the Bombers, but they've been against some pretty good opposition. And I'm going to tip Essendon in this one. And I did say when I did make that ladder prediction, a couple of weeks ago, that Essendon in the next 6 weeks would actually lose all their games. But I did say if they were able to snatch one of those wins, then they would be making the finals. And I think that this could be the game that they could do so, and I think they need to, because their next couple of games are going to be tough. So I'm going to be picking Essendon in a real close one. And finally, we get to the last game of the round, Fremantle versus Carlton at Optus Stadium. Again, another massive game. Loser of this one misses the finals, basically, plain and simple. I'm going to be picking Fremantle, and the only reason is because this is home. I think Fremantle are a lot better at home. I think they struggle away. I think that's going to be a big issue for them, and I think it's a lot of issues for for WA teams in general. I'm going to be picking Fremantle in this one. I think they can get over the top of Carlton, who I think have had some pretty easy wins in the past 2 weeks. I don't think anyone can deny that. So that's my tips for this week, guys. Make sure to let me know down below who you're tipping in the... if you think I've got some tips differently to you guys, make sure to let me know. But those are my tips for round 17. And to finish the podcast today, guys, we're going to be talking about the AFL Fantasy, as we always do. And this week I had a pretty good week. I got 2,477, which is a very good score for me. I think it's the highest I've got this whole year, which I'm pretty proud of. This was actually the first week I've really had a full team. I think this is like pushing towards the end of the season when you get up to your finals or whatever. I've kind of got a full team now, kind of working on it. I guess I've still got Sheasel in the team. I've also got, Jack Steele in the team. So that was probably the 2 that I did kind of need to get rid of. Big standouts this week were Connor Rozee was massive, 145. Lockie Neal was also very good, 127. Marcus Bontempelli with 116. A lot of hundreds. Nick Dacos, obviously, with the 150 was massive. 136 for Jordan Dawson, which was my captain, so 272. Not too many disappointments. I guess Rory Laird with the 85. Kieran Briggs was a little bit disappointing with the 59. And I also got Caleb Daniel in this week, and then he got 74. So I was pretty disappointed about that. Now, one I do want to mention, and I think all of you guys would probably know, Tim Taranto. I would be disappointed by this, but let's be real. He's been so massive the whole year. I think he can have a down week throughout his year. And I'm kind of glad it was on an early night, because I probably would have put him as captain if it wasn't for earlier in the week. So I put him as vice, and he got 80. And I was like, look, they had a pretty off night, Richmond. I don't think any of them could really say they had a good game. So I was disappointed with 80, but I kind of was happy to shake that off a little bit for this week. But nonetheless, we get to the trades. My trades are, I've got rid of Jack Steele. I swear he's playing with an injury. I don't know. I don't care what Ross Lyons says. He's playing with something. I got back Stephen Cornelia. I was going to get him back last week, and I wish I did, because I got Caleb Daniel instead to kind of be a point of difference. And Cornelia played really well. Caleb Daniel was kind of out of it, so a little bit disappointed by that. But things can happen, and I'm happy to get Cornelia back. I've had to put Errol Gordon in the midfield for now. I may be trading out either Caleb Daniel or Ben Hobbs in the next few weeks if their form starts to drop as it has been. But at the moment, I'm happy to put Errol Gordon in the midfield. He's averaging 109, so not like I'm missing much there. And the other trade was I got rid of Harvey Harrelson, I believe his name is, the Collingwood forward, for Elijah Hewitt. The reason why I am getting rid of Harrison is because he was the sub for Collingwood and didn't come on till late, only got the 4 points, and his price didn't go up or down at all. So basically his break-even's kind of shot now. I don't know if he'll be back into the team this week, because I don't think there was many injuries to Collingwood, nor they played really well. So I don't think he's going to be coming back anytime soon. But I had to get this guy in the team, Hewitt. He looks like he's going to be a real gun for the West Coast Eagles, and he was pretty big in that game against the Saints. He only got like 55, but he's definitely showing some sort of prowess and some sort of form for a young West Coast team who, I don't think he's going to get dropped anytime soon. He looks like they want to play the young players who are fit. So I think he's going to get a few games here, Hewitt, and I think he's the right time to bring him in now. He's 269 at the moment, so I should have got him last week, but I'm happy with that at the moment. But yeah, guys, that's the Boundary Riders podcast for this week. Hopefully my brother can be back in the next few weeks. I'm not too sure. He's got some tough things at work at the moment, so that's obviously takes priority over this stupid thing that makes no money for us. But we have a lot of fun doing it, and he's been helping out with things like tips and with the votes and stuff as well, which I really do appreciate. if he can't come in for podcasts, I may try and get him in for some like live streams. I'm sorry I didn't do a live stream this week, guys, but I've had some stuff going on, so I couldn't really do that. I only really watched a couple of games this week that I really try to keep an eye on, like a full game. I know it was the Swans game, and that was that was 3 hours of my life that I wish I could get back, but unfortunately I can't. Thanks for watching today, guys. Make sure to let me know down below. I don't know what you had for lunch. Fucking, I don't know. But also, hopefully your team wins this week. And thanks for watching, but we'll catch you all later.